What's the time now?
I have share my screen, Jordan.
Yeah. Okay, give me 1 second too. Sorry, my computer's choosing now to decide that it wants to restart itself.
No worries.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's wait a few seconds until nearer 10 past. Presentation has joined. So would you like to start? So this is the first paper being presented: barriers and challenges from food waste reducing platforms. The Brazilian case. Maybe I should say soon that also at the beginning, this is being chaired by Shantano, who's also a researcher in CBIZ at Coventry University, and John. We met John at the beginning from Nottingham University. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll hand over to Fabio. Thank you for joining us from Brazil as well.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Let's take a minute. Okay. Can you see?
Yeah, we can see that.
Can you hear me well?
I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon for you. Here in Brazil, it's good morning. My name is Fabio Oroski. I'm from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I'm professor and researcher, and I appreciate this opportunity to share with you the results of our study, the barriers and challenges from food waste reducing platforms, the Brazilian case. Some motivations of our study are food waste reducing platforms have been emerging in different countries and regions such as Europe, and United States, and Asia. However, most existing studies refer to the development of these platforms in high-income countries. These platforms can be seen a recent phenomenon, and in Brazil, a few cases arise in the last 5 years, which somehow explain why little is known about these barriers and challenges faced by innovators in Brazil. So firstly, we believe that it's important to give you a brief overview about the food waste in Brazilian scenario. And Brazil is among the countries that most waste food globally. Opa. Let me change. Okay. And we don't have strategies oriented to measure food waste. And we have been passing through economic crisis that have been inserting millions of people exposed to food insecurity. That was aggravated by pandemic. Unfortunately, maybe we have about 10 million people suffering from severe food insecurity in Brazil. Despite recent progresses of legislation that tries to remove some barriers to donation and food sharing in Brazilian context, most of food system actors are not confident to donate surplus food. So our study aims to identify and explore the main barriers and challenges faced by Brazilian innovators of food waste and reducing platforms. So let's talk about our methodology. We apply a qualitative approach using multiple case studies. Our research design is divided into 3 main steps: case selection, data collection, and data analysis. I'm running through fast. So we apply some criteria to select the platforms to study. The first criteria is that platforms that focus on commercialization of surplus food or imperfect food or food close to expiration date. And the second criteria was platforms oriented for profit, that Michelini call as sharing for money platforms. And the third criteria, that platforms that are already in operation that allowed us to observe the main challenges faced by innovators in the structuring process of their business models. So as I cited before, we have few examples of food sharing platforms in the country and in Brazil, unfortunately, and the number of cases studied is limited. So we have 4 cases. The cases A and B are platforms that sell surplus food to consumers, so they have a B2C model. And the platform C, it's a provide service as structuring the donation process, and they connect retail and NGO and food bank that distribute the food to people in need. And then platform D, it's a platform that try to create new markets for to no commercial food, from food industry to retail and food service. We conducted semi-structured interviews that lasted 1 to 2 hours. And we also collected secondary data about these platforms to support us to understand their business models. After the interviews, we transcribed them and inserted into a software qualitative that's called NVivo to proceed the content analysis following the Bader method in order to identify the main barriers and challenges faced by Brazilian innovators. Let's talk about the main results. We identified 13 barriers and challenges that could be divided into cultural, commercial, technological, organization, economic, institutional categories. These barriers are very deeply interconnected, and all platforms are recent initiatives, therefore they are adapting and restructuring their business model. Now I'm running through the main barriers that the innovators signaled along the interviews and the solutions they have been addressing to minimize them. The first barrier is about the stigma about surplus and leftovers, the idea that food shared is not a good quality food. For example, the platform A said, we want to have the best restaurants in town in our platform, good quality food at reduced prices. So these innovators believe that partnering with recognized actors in cities where they operate is a good strategy to overcome this barrier. The barrier 2 is about assuring food safety. Innovators believe that they have to propose or address some protocols as doing some visiting the partners previously to verify some protocols as hygiene conditions, handling conditions, and to overcome this barrier. And the barrier 3 is about most food system actors do not perceive food waste reducing strategies as an economic opportunity. For example, the platform A declare many established believe it's not economically viable to eliminate food waste. The platform C said the industry declare food waste as a loss to debate. This barrier is strictly related to the next barrier, the barrier 4. Most food system actors consider food waste as part of the current business models. The interviewers believe that food system actors naturalized the act of wasting food. They priced this wasted food in their products. The platform A said the surplus food is part of their business model. The platform C, for example, said, I realized that a huge amount of product in perfect condition is lost in the food industry, often missing 3 or 4 months to expiration date. The barrier 5 is about lack of food waste indicators. As I cited before, they signaled that most of food system actors do not measure waste. So therefore, they don't know how much they waste, and we don't have a picture about the quantity of food waste in Brazil, unfortunately. The platform B said most of them cannot afford strategies to measure food waste, so they consider it in their prices. The barrier 6 is about the lack of technological competences. The founders of platforms confirmed they recognize the role of technology to make their business viable. They believe that developing user-friendly technology could enhance familiarity, interaction, information exchange. But the development of the technology is very complex, costly, and the founders of the platforms don't have the tech background, so they had to hire specialized firms to develop the technology. And the barrier 7 is about the lack of institutional environment to boost sustainable and circular business models in Brazil. This is a difficulty faced by Brazilian innovators. Respondents believe that the absence of favorable institutional environments impairs the creation of circular business models in Brazil, leading to cultural, financial, and organizational barriers. For the reason, this type of platforms could be seen as a novelty for Brazilian people. The barrier 8, it's about coupling economic, environment, and social goals in their business models. A common challenge faced by interviewers that they are very committed to address to deliver more than economic benefits. They emphasize that their initiatives are, in a sense, business that propose real social impacts. For example, the platform A realized that their business model didn't reach people in need, so they adapted their business model, partnering with an NGO that distributes food to people in need in order to people. The barrier 9 is about ensuring affordable and attractive prices. According to the founders of the platforms, prices need to be attractive enough to encourage consumers to buy this type of food, but they see that lower price as a strategy to expand this proposal to more different people from different social classes. The barrier 10 is about the low engagement of commercial partners to food waste cause. Some excerpts from the interviews illustrate this barrier. The platform B commented, my biggest problem today is putting the partner in the cause. Firstly, they enter motivated by sales increase and reputation. We had to make a lot of effort to convince them to understand and embrace the food waste cause. The platform A said, in the beginning, it was very complicated. Potential clients ignore us. So it's a problem, a huge problem that they had to face to establish their business. The barrier 11, I'm sorry, it's about the low engagement of commercial partners to the waste cause. So let me see. Well, I said this, I'm sorry, I made it some confusion. Well, the barrier 12 showing the customer and the value of that business that should be remunerated. Actors, mainly from retail sector, do not accept it for paying for donating food. At a first glance, they do not recognize that it's possible to create economic opportunities fighting food waste. And the 13th barrier, it's about connecting disconnected parties within the food system. The entrepreneurs said they are not a marketplace only where supply and demand match naturally. They must act as a concierge to match their needs, understand and identify their needs. They are responsible for creating a social network to make possible to generate a value co-creation. We could say that probably the most important outcome from our research is that the entrepreneurs see their business as an opportunity to create social impact. They do not want to be seen as a discount platform. An excerpt from the interviews clarified this. Our proposal, our mission is against food waste, but we are different. An environment issue and economic problem. It's essentially a huge social problem. In Brazil, we have millions of people suffering from hunger. So along this presentation, we could show you some of the barriers that the interviews mentioned along in our research. and such as implementation and some strategies they address and to minimize these barriers are the implementation of communication strategies, fostering social impacts, and partnering with high reputation actors, promoting business model transformations, developing user-friendly applications that enhance the familiarity, interaction, information exchange. So we conclude that these platforms cannot be seen as only as digital marketplace. We should see these platforms beyond the technological perspective. We have to see them as a strategy to connect different parts of the food system. But Brazilian entrepreneurs face the low engagement of actors, so they had to invest in efforts in terms of relational competences and communication strategies to make people embrace the cause and people adopt the platforms. All interviewers are fully committed to social perspective and they are really committed to reduce food insecurity. So they believe that coupling multiple benefits, it's important to allow the value co-creation. And despite the lack of a favorable institutional environment that leads to the low economic availability, we do believe that these platforms are very interesting solutions in Brazilian case to fight food waste. Based on our interviews, you could see these platforms as a strategy, not only to recover food, but as a strategy to increase the awareness about the food waste. And innovators understand that the need of transforming consumers and food system actors from spectators to protagonists in the food waste fight. We intend to compare our results with the existing literature and to verify the difference between Brazilian case with other countries' experience. And in certain more cases in our analysis, we have been interviewing along this year. And we understand that exploring consumer side, it's important to understand their motivations and expectations. So thank you. I don't know if I passed the time. I'm sorry for my Brazilian English. I try to make you understand.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Perfect on time there. Yeah, I mean, it's really great to get some insight on what these platforms are like outside Europe. I mean, I know a lot about Too Good To Go and Olio, etc., but I don't know much about what happens, for example, in Brazil. Do we see if we've got any questions? I mean, I had one around whether these platforms contribute towards like food insecurity. Do they help people in need or people dealing with like food poverty or anything like that?
Yeah, I really do believe that these platforms can, if I understand your question, they can help reducing food insecurity in Brazilian context, but we don't believe that it's the only strategy or they are capable to solve this problem, but we understand that their main role is to make people aware about the food waste and bring people together to fight food waste. And most of the entrepreneurs said that the adopters of the platforms are not people in need, but they are more conscious about the food waste. So we think that it's an important step to make Brazilian people more aware about the cause, and most of the platforms believe that they have to make collaboration with NGOs to distribute surplus food. So I believe that there's a sense of cooperation around this type of platforms that could address and could help in reducing food insecurity in Brazilian context. I think, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's right. Did you have any questions, John or Shantanu?
I just one quick one, and thanks very much, Fabio. That was really interesting. It certainly confirms a lot of our thinking around these issues as well. I was just wondering whether or not you might speculate about the point at the end around the difference between potentially Brazilian food sharing compared to the rest of the world. If there's any insight that you have from your early work about what those differences might be.
Yeah, I think our first impression comparing the Brazilian context with other countries that one of the main barriers that we face now to develop this type of solutions is the lack of knowledge about Brazilian people about these platforms in general. We have to make people more confident to use these platforms, to put their data, their credit cards, in some level are not confident to use this platform and not use it to this type of platform. So there is a phase that we understand that is critical to make people aware about food waste and bring them and try to overcome this initial barrier that is to make them embrace the cause. Firstly, I think it's a good strategy to overcome this barrier and make them embrace these platforms. I think it's the big challenge in Brazil context, to make people aware about food waste and after establishing communication strategies to make them believe that they can contribute to reduce not only food waste but food insecurity. Food waste and food insecurity are very deeply interconnected in Brazilian context. So I think it's a good manner to bring people to adopt these platforms. I think it's specific. It's not a specific, but to Brazilian case, but I believe it's an important point that I would like to highlight, to underline in Brazilian context. I think the lack of knowledge about this type of platforms.
Fantastic. It seems this is going to seem really cynical when I present next, but I mean that issue is central to our work too. I suspect probably for a lot of other people in the track as well. That question of knowledge and learning, the difference between what people understand as fair share, food sharing seems really important. Yeah, thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Fabio. That was really interesting. Great. So next we move on to John. You're going to present this one. This is part of the team that you work with at Nottingham.
Yeah, that's right. Well, do you want to allow me to share the screen?
Oh yeah. So Fabio, if you stop sharing, that'll.
Okay. Let me find here. Okay. How could I? Wow.
And we're doing perfect for time there. 15-minute presentation, 5-minute question. That's fine. So it should be around 2 hours, this session, finishing at 4, with 4:10 being the time of the next event.
I think it's better.
There we go. Thank you. So John's presentation will be co-creating value from failed experiences in the sharing economy. I like the animations as well. You're on mute at the moment, John.
Of course I'm on mute. Ask me to help chair the track. And the first one to make mistakes. Okay, can you see that?
We can see that, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, do I need to minimize this? Are you looking at yourself?
No.
Okay, so yeah, my name is John Harvey. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Nottingham. And I work in the NLab, which is a research group focused on the application of machine learning to social good. My interest is really anthropology, and I've been working with Olio, who Jordan just mentioned, for a few years. And in particular, we've been looking at failed experiences of food sharing. And this work that I'll talk about today is, I'll start more broadly, but then talk specifically about work that my colleagues Vanya and Georgie, who's just joined on the video by the look of it, has been leading. So I don't think I need to tell anybody here that food waste is a problem. But what I want to say specifically before I start is that consumer food waste is bigger than most people expect. And as we heard earlier from Jamie, 50% of food waste in the UK is consumer food waste. And that's the case for many high-income countries. So if we're to meet SDG targets, if we're going to meet the Paris Climate Agreement, it's really critical that consumer food waste specifically gets a lot of attention. And so we're going to need structural interventions, but we're going to have to think carefully about how it is that we choose the food that we consume and how we dispose of it. So enter Olio. These two brilliant ladies, Sasha and Tessa, decided to set up Olio a few years ago. If you haven't seen it, it's a fairly straightforward consumer-facing app. It's free to download, very easy to use. It's been used by over 4 million people now in lots of different countries around the world, and around 17 million portions of food have been shared through the application so far. So they've had a lot of traction and it's growing rapidly. I'd encourage you to download it if you haven't already seen it. If you do download it, you'll see something that looks a little bit like this. A very familiar social media type news feed, personal profiles, and ratings of interactions, and also a means to take photos and add food, and also to have private messaging with people to negotiate how food sharing might happen offline. Now, I'd like to pause for a second and put a kind of anthropological hat on and say, when we talk about food sharing, I kind of get frustrated because although we probably intuitively think this is food sharing, when we think about sitting around a table and sharing food with our loved ones, that's clearly not what's going on. It's not the behavior that's going on in Olio's case. Even though I really, really like it, it's not the same type of behavior that we typically associate with food sharing. In fact, I would say it's more like donation. The people participating don't necessarily eat the same food, nor do they necessarily know one another. So anthropologically speaking, at least, I'm arguing that these two things are probably different. And actually the behaviors are relatively novel historically. And that's important. When we look at the network, we find that lots of communities have formed. If you look back at some of our early work with Olio, we tried to map the connections that exist between people on the platform. And to see the hairballs, the clusters there, represent community. They are people genuinely interacting with one another. But when we dig into those communities, we see behavioral splits. So typically there'll be donors and recipients, and there'll be less people who fall in the middle. Not only that, there are supermarkets on the platform who redistribute food, and they do that through a volunteer network, which is also growing. I think upwards of 50,000 people have asked to take part in this Food Waste Hero program, where they redistribute food. So there's a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different behaviors. And not only that, as we've already heard a little bit about today, food insecurity is a problem just as it is everywhere else in society. On Olio, we did a little bit of work, so that this is the royal we, Georgie led some work looking at food insecurity on Olio's platform. It's relatively similar to the UK population, but it does change how people use these types of service. So we need to be mindful of all of these different stakeholders when we think about failure and why sharing breaks down. Because I'm arguing that this is a relatively new type of behavior, and these digitally mediated food behaviors are emergent. And the associated social norms are being learned all the time. So just as Fabio suggested about learning previously, I think that's something really important here. You can't really participate until you learn, but you can't learn until you participate. And these things goes on and on and on, and iterates and iterates and iterates. So we were interested in studying where food sharing fails, where it breaks down, and how we might ensure people get a better experience. Now, we started for this big study, which I won't talk too much about, but I think is interesting as framing, looking at 1 million pickups between Olio users where food is being picked up physically. And within that, we looked at over 500,000 ratings that people assigned to one another. We also looked at the community forum, which is the first place that people normally visit when they download the application. And you can see an example on the right-hand side of the types of posts that show up. These tend to be questions and answers where people go to learn how to use the app, or they'll use it to complain as well. So from those stories that we saw in the application, we extracted a subsample of where people were getting negative transactions. There's kind of 1-star ratings where they've had a really bad experience, but also where they'd used the forum to interact. And we thought that would give an insight into the types of interactions that people are likely to be having and why it might be going wrong. Now, before I go into that, it's worth recognizing that generally speaking, food sharing is successful. Over 90% of ratings on the platform are 5 stars, suggesting that people have, in fact, learned to use it in the large part. But lots of people don't actually use the ratings as well, and that varies depending on the categories that you can see in the bottom left. What adds to the complexity we found as well is that we can think of lots of different interactions of food sharing. The food waste heroes, the volunteers, sometimes interact with each other. They interact with the general consumers on the platform. The consumers on the platform interact with one another, and vice versa. So there's potentially 4 different directions of food sharing. And of those, there are potentially 8 different types of ratings that we could dig into. And we see variety in all of those about what type of things go wrong. Just quickly, for example, we can see that some things hold fairly stable. So if people aren't very timely in responding, or if they live a long way away, or if they break down communication in the messages, that can be frustrating, or if cancellations happen. But we also see very specific things to the stakeholders in the network that matter to them. For instance, the volunteers might redistribute a lot of food, and that's quite cognitively demanding, but it's also potentially emotionally demanding as well, responding to all of these different participants within the network. When we look at all of the different types of complaints in the forum, we did this qualitatively. We found not only that are there different types of complaints that people record that could be to do with arrangements or etiquette, kind of manners, something that might be very culturally specific, to volunteer challenges, or actually just learning about the Olio protocol. How should you use it? What food is appropriate to add? Am I okay to meet people in this context? To more mundane technical features. I can't get this thing to work. It might be a problem of technical literacy. It might be an actual problem, or it could be unethical behaviors too. In rare instances, we might see things like stealing, for example. And these complaints could be directed at Olio. They could be directed at the people who add food or take food. They could be the volunteer network, or they could be the third parties. So when we were thinking about how we might help, we thought it would be useful to try and come up with a general purpose method of understanding when people are complaining about the interactions, and in particular when they're doing it on the forum. So the question we were asking then was, can we develop a complaints classifier to help identify people who are experiencing issues with food sharing? And specifically when we say complaint, we're not saying here just dislike, I don't like something. We're saying something that's borrowed from the consumer research literature. If you're interested in the paper, we can share it with you later on, but we borrowed from consumer research to think about the psychology of complaints. And we're using a very specific label here to identify what complaints are. Specifically, we're saying there is a discrepancy or a misalignment between what we expect to happen in food sharing and what a person actually experiences. And if there's a disconnect there, that some affective state gives rise to negative disconfirmation. They're dissatisfied and unhappy, and they complain. So we're looking for that linguistically within complaints. Is there a discrepancy? What's also really interesting though as well is that this isn't a normal complaint. It's not like going to a shop and complaining, or saying to your friends or family, I don't like this. Nor is it even trying to get an intermediary like a lawyer involved. It's broadcasting a complaint to a network of people simultaneously. And that means that many people see it, that it's in public, that it's asynchronous, that lots of people can interact with it. It doesn't have to be live, and it can happen remotely. So anybody around the world can potentially interact with it. So the forum is quite unusual for where a complaint might be resolved. So for the method then, we looked at some complaints and non-complaints, and we tried to classify yes or no, is it some stories, sorry, and trying to classify, is it a complaint or not? And we split the data into training and test sets, and then Vanya, the lead author, experimented with some machine learning approaches to classification, which I'll talk about in a moment. And as part of that, she identified features for every story, about the text, about the linguistics, about the sentiment, the emotion expressed, and about the behaviors that people exhibit too. One of the key findings were that complaints tend to be longer, probably ranting as a keyboard warrior, hammering a keyboard. You can imagine doing it yourself. In practice, they do tend to be longer. They also have particular linguistic features. So we look for things like swear words. They tend to have less emojis. They use more first-person language. I did this or that. And we looked for things like past tense, for example. We also looked at the subjective score. So do people talk about emotional words or experiential words? And we also looked at sentiment. Both of those things were important because complaints tend to carry higher subjectivity and higher scores for sentiment. Both of those are important for our definition too, which is important. I think these things are showing up when we do actually look for them. And then lastly, we can think about who interacts with a post. If you've been on Twitter and you've seen a post that has more comments than retweets, you might have seen people saying it's been ratioed, and something similar happens on Olio. Complaint stories tend to have more comments and less likes, which is fairly intuitive, but that's important, as I'll mention in a moment. So lots of these features are interacting, and that's meaningful because it means that we can potentially develop a classifier that is useful in practice at scale. So can we use computational methods to identify complaints at scale? And we think there's promise there. The best performing model that was developed was a random forest model using linguistic features, and that had about an 84% accuracy. But if you notice below that, when we use behavioral features, the accuracy and precision improves as well. So the use of how people respond to complaints could be used to classify too. However, when you look at that graph on the right, we start to get a really interesting trade-off that's introduced. If we want to classify complaints, we can look at behaviors to do so, and we'll get a better predictive performance. But complaints take a while to build up responses. About 6 hours after a post, 75% of the comments will have been there. So that might be useful as a training data set. But do we really want to wait 6 hours before a complaint is resolved or has some remedial action? Probably not. You're probably getting really frustrated. You might be waiting for somebody, trying to deal with somebody who's not responding, and you want a resolution before the food goes to waste. So there's a really interesting tension about improving predictive accuracy and actually resolving the complaint that is practically an issue that might be prevalent on lots of different sharing platforms, we think, particularly for those that are food sharing. But yeah, on the feature importance, you can see the rank on the left of those different features that were useful, that separate the predictions from a complaint or a non-complaint, and it tends to be fairly intuitive stuff like I've just talked about. So to summarize that discussion then, I've tried to go through quite a lot, but the key thing I really want to draw attention to is that these sharing behaviors are relatively new, and we shouldn't treat them as if they are some historic relic of what food sharing is. We shouldn't rely upon old tropes about what food sharing is. It's obviously new. And that means that we have new associated social norms that are in a process of evolving. Like I said before, to learn, we need to participate. To participate, we need to learn. And that dynamic process is something that's really worth studying. Because if we're going to generate solutions to help support people do this and actually meet SDG goals or climate emergency problems, then we need to be able to scale some of these technological platforms, in my belief. So what I'd like to summarize then is that linguistic features could be useful for this purpose, for helping people to smooth those interactions. We can look for longer posts, less emojis, more first-person words, increased use of subjective words, and negative sentiment. But we can also potentially use behavioral data as a trade-off between predictive accuracy and complaint resolution urgency. If we need to resolve complaints quickly, then potentially we need a bit of a trade-off. And it might be that future work could focus on the objects of complaint that I mentioned earlier to try and deal with those problems that might be really, really problematic, really, really serious compared to those that are slightly more mundane or don't need such urgency. And then lastly, I'd just like to say that these forms of human-computer interaction and interaction design, they enable new forms of food sharing, but they also enable new forms of complaining. And we need to take both of these into account if we're trying to understand how they scale, because they are dynamically involved with one another, interacting and changing over time. So yeah, I've gone through that fairly quickly. The first work that we talked about is still being written up, but we do have a paper that's in draft at the moment in review. If anybody's interested to read it, do please drop me an email and I'll be happy to share it. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, John. Really, really interesting. Again, yeah, I think it's interesting that the complaint side was the kind of focus on that. I wondered, was that kind of the input from the partner that they wanted more information around that, or was that an interest from like an academic interest?
I don't know if Vanya is here, but Vanya, I think she's in the chat, has expertise in this area as part of a PhD. So it seemed like a natural opportunity when we were thinking about possible interventions. One of the community managers for Food Waste Heroes at Olio has actually started to implement changes based on our recommendations that are outside of the forum. But yeah, the forum looks like low-hanging fruit. If we're really to try and help people to improve the performance of food sharing, then we need to try and attack those problems that are easiest. And I think in this case, it seems like an obvious one. We go to this place to learn, so ensuring that people have a really good interaction in the first instance is probably fundamental. And I think, just as Fabio was talking about, the learning is fundamental to this. I really like Olio, but it's quite weird. What we're asking people to do is share food in this way with strangers. It's pretty weird. Don't talk to strangers. And now we're just meeting them off the internet and sharing food with them. It's unusual historically. And I think the learning experience needs to be molded as a consequence. And it just seems that the forum is a good place for that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the idea that we don't yet kind of know what food sharing is, it's being adapted as these new technologies come forward and the way that people interact online. I have put another question in, but we'll go to someone else. I feel like I'm asking all the questions. So to what extent did the legal resolution of complaints? So I suppose this is like a legal side of, is there kind of a legal of complaints and what that means?
I think that's something that generally falls outside my experience, to be honest.
Okay.
I know that the training for volunteers in particular focuses around particularly laws as they relate to health and safety. And I think that's probably the biggest obstacle for companies that are trying to encourage food sharing. I know from looking at lots of organizations that do encourage these types of collaborative consumption, that the blame can quite quickly switch when strangers meet, from the strangers to the platform that actually that supported that interaction. And I don't think there are easy answers for these types of organizations, really, other than encouraging safe and appropriate ways to interact. There's obviously risk entailed when they try to encourage people to go and meet strangers on the internet. It's a worthy goal, but there is inevitably risk that is introduced when that type of interaction is encouraged. So yeah, I'm not sure I can do a decent answer to talking about legal resolution of problems. And in fact, in the instances where I think there have been legal issues, it's probably reported to the police. I'm thinking specifically of examples where we saw people taking things that they may leave some food on the doorstep, and then someone steals your bike that's next to the food. Like, these things aren't necessarily the platform's fault, but they will become implicated by virtue of pairing people. I don't think there are that many legal problems, though, although you do see people taking things that they shouldn't, particularly for food. If there is multiple things that you want to share with people and you're going out, maybe you leave 5 parcels of food for people, it can quickly become, whether through miscommunication or malice, a problem when people take too much. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose it's sort of the app itself sort of facilitates the interaction, but what actually happens in the real world is a bit unknown. Do you have a question, Shantanu?
No, I know.
No? Okay. Okay, I can ask another one if you like. I think it's interesting that Olio have kind of gone towards the route of having this kind of social media interface, like having the kind of feed and you can have a profile. But at the same time, there are kind of dangers that come with that. So if you think about kind of Twitter and trolling and all that, and I know you're looking at complaints, but I wonder, does that kind of go over to the side where people are kind of having malice, like you said, online as well? Did that play a role in the research? And I suppose Audio must have some kind of process of navigating that within their interface as well.
I think they could talk more effectively about those instances where you get trolls, or I don't know. I know quite a lot of women that get chatted up on LinkedIn, and like what. And I think there's probably equivalent problems that probably happen when you introduce a social media form like this. I'm not sure specifically for Olio, but I can speak of the data that we looked at, and it tends to be not malice that happens, it's frustration. And I've experienced this myself in food sharing platforms and other places where you post something, someone will say they'll collect it, and then they don't respond to you and they just ghost you. And that, I think, is actually quite a widespread problem. And thinking about how technology might subtly nudge people to be polite, to actually attend to what the other person is doing as an act of generosity, I think that's more important. But yeah, I think it's not really a social media platform that breeds a lot of malice in my experience of it. I don't know, Georgie or Vanya might have something more to say in that. But my experience of that is that there probably isn't that much malice. It's just fatigue when someone doesn't do what they promised to do.
And it's bringing back food sharing to be dependent upon like the nicety of interaction, whether that's on the app or in person as well.
Yeah, people want to be rewarded with 5 stars as well. That's something we saw. If you go out of your way to be generous, you want recognition in most cases. Although we probably say we don't, we just do it out of the goodness of our heart. It seems that people do want to be rated. They want to acknowledgement from the community they participate in that what they're doing is good. And I think that's one maybe social media mechanism that they could work on to try and make people feel involved, and that sharing, actually owning the importance of this thing is not something that's just there to acquire food, but it's as a broader goal.
Yeah. I think we could talk about this for quite a while. We need to move on to the next presentation, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Great, thank you, John. So we'll move on to the next one, which was related to the Share City project that we heard about at the beginning by Anna Davies. Hand over to, is it Alwyn?
Alwyn, yes. Thanks,
Alwyn, yeah.
Jordan. Cheers. Thanks. I'll just share my screen. Fantastic talks so far. Really enjoying them. It's a tough act to follow. I just move this. Can you see my screen okay, Jordan?
We can, yes.
Super, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm here to talk to you about our learnings from the testing of our online impact assessment toolkit for food sharing initiatives. So it comes from, the Share City project, who you may have heard from Anna this morning. And the Share City project is a 5-year European Horizon research project based in Trinity College Dublin that looks at these collaborative acts around food and food sharing. And as part of the Share City project, it produced this online toolkit called Share It, where any type of food sharing group can measure their sustainability impacts. So what I want to talk to you about today is really the barriers and opportunities that existed when we tried to bring this free toolkit to the food sharing community, and what we learned about where we are in terms of quantifying and measuring the sustainability impacts food sharing is having. Just go on to the next slide. So so the challenge, as you all know from our conversations today, is that the food system is unsustainable. It has issues of high waste and emissions. It has a vulnerable supply chain, such as we saw with empty supermarkets during the recent pandemic. And it is socially unjust, with healthy and nutritious food often being inaccessible, and environmentally friendly food often being more expensive to different people experiencing socioeconomic challenges. So one of the responses to this challenge is these food sharing initiatives that are trying to change this. And when we are referring to food sharing for the purposes of our research, we're referring to any group that grows food together, eats food together, or redistributes surplus food. So it could take the form of a community garden. It could be a community supported agriculture scheme that connects producers directly with customers. It could be surplus food redistribution like Olio that John just discussed, or Food Cloud here in Ireland, or a community kitchen where people come together to share food. So for our research, if you look at more specifically how we defined food sharing, we looked at what are the groups sharing, which is kind of in three categories. It's any kind of stuff, space, or skills to do with food. So it could be like seeds and plants or food itself. It could be compost and sharing gardening tools. It could be land, kitchen space, knowledge and skills, and meals. We also looked at how the sharing is organized. It could be, for example, a charity or a nonprofit, or it could be a for-profit business. It could be a cooperative club, or even just an informal group. And we looked at how the sharing happens. So bartering, where you exchange one item for another; gifting, that is giving it for free; selling it for money; or collecting, like dumpster diving and skip surfing. So if you'd like to have a look at our ShareCity 100 database, it's on sharecity.ie. We've quantified the extent of these food sharing activities in 100 cities around the world. So you can have a look at your closest city and see what type of food sharing activity according to these definitions is taking place. But what I really want to talk to you about today is Share It, a sustainability impact assessment toolkit that we developed as part of the ShareCity project. So Share It has three features. The toolshed measures the sustainability impact using a questionnaire that has 100 questions organized under 34 areas of social, environmental, and economic impact. The Talent Garden is a space for food sharing initiatives to upload information that shows their impact that can't be easily quantified in the questionnaire. So at the moment, they're using it for putting up photographs, social media posts, and videos that evidence the impacts that they are having within their community. And then the greenhouse is aiming to build a community of practice. It's effectively online dating for food sharing groups, where you can meet other groups with similar interests to you and learn from the type of challenges and barriers that they've faced in their context in different cities around the world. So if we look a little bit closer at the impact that Share It measures for these food sharing groups, there's 4 pillars: environment, social, economic, and governance. Within environmental questions, it'll ask about what your practices are, how you manage emissions, like do you use, for example, bicycle transport for your deliveries, or what other steps have you taken to lower your carbon footprint? How do you manage unavoidable waste, and how do you reduce the amount of avoidable waste? Socially, you'd ask questions about how accessible the food sharing is, health and well-being benefits such as volunteering benefits, for example, and how people's support structure and friendship circles are increasing because of the food sharing activity. So that's got in the community pillar of questions. Economically, we'd ask how many jobs that the group is offering, and within those jobs, how many are a fair living wage. Affordability and how you're having an impact on people's food budgets, and production, how much food you are producing, especially if you're a growing initiative. And then in governance, we just ask questions around how you manage risk and risk control, the level of formal strategic planning that's taking place, and whether sustainability is a pillar of that planning, and civic responsibility. Do you enable and support participants to engage in, for example, protesting, voting, contributing to public consultations, and things like that. So this is just an example of the sort of prototype. Share It is in its prototype form at the moment, and it's available free to use and test from any group that wants to try it out. And this is an example of the type of graphics and images that it produces. This is from a community garden here in Dublin. And it just aims to be easy to read, easy to understand. It's 2 A4 pages, and it also connects your work directly to the different indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the question we really wanted to ask is, does Share It have a market case? Is there a way for us to generate revenue from Share It that can allow it to exist beyond the lifetime of our research project? So we identified 3 potential customer segments to ask this question: the food sharing initiatives themselves, public authorities that are providing policies and fundings that could provide an enabling environment for food sharing to take place, and the food retailers that are donating to these food sharing initiatives. We had 3 questions to ask these 3 groups, which is, do you have a need for sustainability reporting of food sharing activity? Does Share It meet that need? And are you willing to pay for Share It to meet that need? And our preliminary research over the summer has been to do that through 10 interviews with these stakeholders. So before I get into their answers to these questions, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the kind of value proposition we're bringing to these customers, about like what we are pitching to them to ask if it's something they'd be willing to invest in. So what value does Share It offer the food sharing initiatives themselves? Food sharing initiatives are very often not necessarily motivated by sustainability. They could be motivated by a social cause. A community garden could just be a group of people that love to come together to garden. They're not necessarily interested in quantifying their sustainability impact. So we do need to make the case for why they might want to use something like Share It. So Share It results can be used to raise awareness about their work. It can strengthen their funding applications and help them to be more competitive, and it can inform their strategic plan for the future. Our next target customer was public authorities, and currently they have this relationship of providing land, policies and funding that can be used by food sharing initiatives, but there's a big gap there in the visibility of what impact the land and policies and funding is having, and Share It can be used to fill that gap and provide more strategic insights and feedback to the public authorities. So this would have the dual benefit of helping the food sharing initiatives understand their impacts by using the Share It toolkit, but public authorities can strategically plan to maximize the progress towards sustainable development goals within their jurisdiction. They can communicate the impacts easily internally between different departments and to the public, and they can track their progress towards their commitments to achieve the sustainable development goals. The next customer we're kind of making a case for is food retailers who are donating their surplus food to charity partners. They often know exactly what they are donating, but they don't necessarily know what happens to that food within the community and what social and environmental benefits are achieved by that food being distributed through the community. So Share It could potentially measure that impact by working with the charity partners. And this can help food retailers understand the impact of donations, communicate that impact to customers, and inform future corporate social responsibility strategies. So the data we collected was through 10 stakeholder interviews. So the food sharing initiatives themselves, we talked to an urban farm and 2 surplus food redistributors. Among public authorities, we talked to 3 national public authorities and 1 international network of city authorities. And among food retailers, we talked to 2 large international supermarkets, a food wholesaler that typically supplies to restaurants, and a food consumer goods coalition that represented the membership of multiple supermarkets and food retailers. And then we also had pre-existing data from the Share City project, including detailed feedback from 10 food sharing initiatives that were our pilot testers that tested the Share It toolkit and gave us relevant feedback. And we also had further feedback from public authorities through a workshop that we did with policymakers. So the results of these interviews were very much that all 3 stakeholders confirmed that there was a need for sustainability reporting from food sharing initiatives, that Share It's design and approach does effectively meet that need. However, at this point, there is not a willingness or an ability to pay for Share It in any of the 3 stakeholders groups. So there's not really a viable way to get revenue coming in to support Share It beyond research funding at this point. So let's unpack those questions a little bit deeper. So if we look at what the need for sustainability reporting is, among food sharing initiatives, they reported that they need evidence to build a case for more funding. Here in Ireland, any community funding over 20,000 often requires a sustainability reporting, better policy support, and more value placed on the social and environmental impacts they are having, and not just looking at their impacts through an economic lens. Among public authorities, they confirm that they need to report on their local progress towards the global sustainability development goals, and also how they are fulfilling their national sustainability agenda. And among food retailers, they identified a need to reduce edible food waste and demonstrate the impacts of their corporate social responsibility to manage the risk of being accused of greenwashing or social washing. So those are the needs for the sustainability reporting, but unfortunately at present, those needs are vastly outweighed by the barriers. So barriers experienced by food sharing initiatives are very low reporting capacity, very low capacity to take the time to do the reporting. They cannot afford to pay for staff support from the Share It team. They cannot afford to get a consultant to help them to do the assessment for them. And often sustainability and sustainability impact assessments are not really a main goal that they are pursuing. Barriers that public authorities face is siloed thinking and dispersed responsibility among different government departments, which could look at different social, environmental, and economic impacts, and a lack of willingness to pay due to just a general low awareness and low priority for what food sharing initiatives are and what they are contributing in a dispersed way across multiple departments and multiple different people's responsibilities. And then for the food retailers, there's a lack of willingness to go beyond the actual food donations, as they sort of believe it's the food sharing initiative's job to report on the community impacts, or possibly the public authorities should support charities in being able to do that. So they didn't really see their role going beyond sustainability, going beyond the donations themselves. So what supports do we need to tip the scales in favor of sustainability reporting? For food sharing initiatives, we need to provide external or free or very affordable support that enables data collection and reporting. For public authorities, we need to design governance mechanisms that enable holistic sustainability policy and funding decisions across different sectors and departments. And for food retailers, we need to incentivize reporting on the end of use of their surplus food, and look at models where you can find edible food going to waste, like in France and Italy, and to incentivize making donating food more financially competitive, and the associated reporting with comprehensive reporting of what's happening to the unsold edible food within a food retailing business. So that's the findings we have from our preliminary research on this area, which we'll be continuing to work on over the next year or so. The next steps for us is we want to upgrade the Share It prototype. It's currently just a prototype, and we've lots of ideas to make it easier to use, and even more useful and user-friendly for the food sharing initiatives themselves. We want to test different user support models to see what exactly does a food sharing initiative need to be able to deliver a sustainability report. And we're going to do that by providing free trials of support and conduct further interviews. And then we want to test and validate the value propositions we've made to other stakeholders by offering a free trial to public authorities. We've just started one with an inner city area here in Dublin, where we're quantifying the sustainability impacts of all of the food sharing activity happening within a certain region of Dublin, to report that back to the public authority and get their feedback on whether that is something they would invest in the future. And similarly, we'd like to offer a free trial to a food retailer where we quantify all of the downstream sustainability impacts that happens when their food is distributed among different community groups. And we also want to look at the future food policy and governance workshops with policymakers, which will be conducted by my colleague, Dr. Louise Fitzgerald, where she will sit down with a group of policymakers and with a series of scenarios that she's worked with an artist to produce, and look at different possible food sharing futures and what possible policies need to be designed across different departments to make those futures possible. So thank you so much for your attention, and here are all the details if you want to find out more, and please do drop me an email at amcgeev@tcd.ie if you'd like to learn any more, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Fantastic, thank you. Really, really interesting. Really powerful tool, it looks like as well. So we have some questions in the chat, and I'll start with the one from John. Who says, what type of measures from sustainability reporting do you think might be most useful to help food sharing organisations get additional funding?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the sustainable development goals in the community sector are becoming more visible in the funding applications. So I think demonstrating specifically how I think it's hard at a local level to show progress towards the sustainable development goals. So for our like 100 questions, we've identified which ones link directly to an indicator of a sustainable development goal, so that you can show how your initiative would progress those. But then I also do think it's the holistic statement of the wide range of social and environmental value food sharing could bring to a local area. It depends, of course, on the different funding calls. Like we've been asking a lot about the community funding calls, like the community funds here in Ireland that a lot of charities would use. And that's very much looking at what kind of impact you're going to have on the ground, and can you prove you're going to have that impact. And the demand is getting higher and higher to report when you get a grant on what impact you've had and how you've fulfilled that. So if Share It could offer a sort of streamlined, accessible way to do that, instead of having to produce a different type of report for every different small project you're going to do, if you just have one database where you have all of your different impacts, you can cherry pick the relevant ones for different grant applications, if it's an environmental value-based grant or a social value-based grant. Like what we found with our pilot food sharing initiatives that tried out Share It, they might have started for a social reason, like empowering young people in a local area that didn't have many opportunities. And they were sort of surprised and delighted to realize the wide range of environmental impacts they were having by taking surplus food and making it into meals that they were giving to the youth during a homework club, for example. And in that context, that would make them eligible for maybe some environmental funding and food waste reduction funding that they hadn't previously considered. So I think Share It offering that holistic range of all of the different impacts you could possibly be having has two benefits. Like firstly, you can identify what answers you don't have for Share It. So moving forward, you can start to collect data that that's not too hard to collect, but you didn't really think of collecting before, like how many people are attending your events, for example. So you can get new impact metrics to use in future applications, but you'd also just have a neatly ordered Excel spreadsheet where you can cherry pick all the buzzwords that's in a particular grant application. So I think that's the real benefit sustainability reporting could bring to the community funding landscape.
I suppose it's that question of bringing awareness and kind of formalizing and understanding the impact of these food sharing activities. And the tool that you speak about, it sounds really, really powerful to do that. Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask, if there is kind of huge take-up of your tool, how do you perhaps suppose you might use some of the data you might gather from that? Do you have an insight on what that might tell you? And would you need to kind of move on quickly? But I just wanted to hear the answer to that quick.
Yeah, so definitely the best thing from our perspective for Share City about Share It is all of the reports are standardized, so we can easily compare different initiatives. And I should say, of course, like all of these groups, we're saying food sharing initiatives for the purpose of our research. They don't necessarily call themselves food sharing initiatives. So it's very hard to put like a community kitchen, a soup kitchen, a community garden, and a surplus food redistribution group and a skip diving club all on the same platform and compare like apples and oranges about what their their different impacts they're having. And Share It gives us an opportunity to put them all on the scale of the Sustainable Development Goals, put them all in the category of just looking at social value alone. And really, I think it's the power for it is the cumulative sustainability impact these groups are having. But because they're often local, grassroots, small, and their impacts are dispersed across economic, environmental, and social, as individuals, they're not recognized and they're not getting the support that they deserve for the sort of impact that they are having. And what Share It could do by having standardized reports that are comparable, we can start to accumulate the impacts across different groups. And we can say, if you have 40 food sharing initiatives within your city, we can tell the government, if you provide funding for 40 food sharing initiatives within your jurisdiction, this is the impact you would have. And here's all of the ways you're going to deliver on that national agenda that you have to report on in 12 months' time.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Really interesting to hear. So we've got 2 presentations remaining before we finish, hopefully at 4 or just past 4. So I'll hand over next to Shantanu Malik. So the presentation is going to, paper's going to put forward, which categories should supermarkets upload on food waste reducing digital platforms?
Yeah, can you guys see the screen?
You can see, yeah, I can see.
Okay, great. So yeah, as you can see, I've changed the title a little bit, and from there already you can see it's still preliminary work, but we have some nice results I want to talk to you about. Okay, so this is about, as also Jordan pointed out, it's about interplay of supermarkets and food waste reducing platforms and the role of product categories. So this work started when I was in Eindhoven in Netherlands before I joined Coventry, where I am an assistant professor and a colleague of Jordan in CBIS. And so this work is, we have a previous paper which looks at how kind of the two-sided platform kind of a nature of supermarkets and food waste reducing platforms. And here we kind of extend that to try to focus more on product categories and how they play a role in this whole equation. This is joint work with my ex-colleagues Naomi and Mohammed at TU Eindhoven. Okay. So why would supermarkets care about reducing food waste? Well, it does result in a significant cost to their businesses and suppliers. Some industry reports find that it's a large profit opportunity. And also as consumers, we like to be associated with and shop from a supermarket, which is kind of socially responsible. So the main initiative that supermarkets have is called last-minute discounts. So what are they exactly? So essentially, whenever you have, let us say, an avocado or any other perishable product, there's a due date, and it has to be sold by that date, otherwise it's going to be thrown out. And what supermarkets do is they offer kind of a last-minute discount 1 or 2 days before the product expires. And they put like a discount sticker on the product. And I'll show you an example when I talk about the empirical setting. Now, the thing is that these discounts are only visible if you happen to be inside the supermarket and shopping. And if you're not, you don't get to see them. And so the discounts are not that effective typically. So to help kind of share this information in a quicker way, you have kind of food waste reducing platforms have joined forces with supermarkets. So what they do is that they alert consumers living near supermarkets about these discounts that are on offer, and that would promote store visits. And if you visit a store or supermarket, ideally what we've spoken with store managers is that there's plenty of cross-selling opportunities. So supermarkets are basically interested in getting more people into their doors. So how does it look like pictorially. So this is kind of a brief idea. So you have the supermarket on the right, products expiring, you put these products on these digital platforms. You have consumers who sign up to the digital platforms, and then based on their GPS location, these platforms can then suggest which supermarkets they are collaborating with, and consumers pick a supermarket that's close to them, and subsequently they can see what is on offer in that supermarket, and if they like it, they can go and visit the supermarket. So what's interesting to clarify out here is that there are different kinds of food sharing business models, and the kind of business model we are looking at, consumers can't buy the product via the platform, but they actually have to go and visit the supermarket physically to pick up the product. So where is the problem for supermarkets? Well, day-to-day operations have kept their staff quite busy in general. And as we all know, post-COVID, most of us are buying stuff online. And so as they have to kind of, cater to that, their workload has increased even further. Secondly, to kind of put a last-minute discount onto the platform can be quite cumbersome. In that you need to add every product separately, and it takes up a lot of time. And you need to ideally go to the rounds every day, because every day some product or the other can be typically would expire or are close to expiring. So as a result of all these, mistakes can be made where, for instance, some products continue to stay on the shelves after the expiry dates. And that can lead to sanctions. For instance, this is an example of Tesco being fined a few millions for selling out of date food in their stores. And I think sometimes even when we order food online and get it delivered to our place, sometimes I personally have found products that are out of date. So these issues do creep up. So now what I'm going to talk about here is just trying to give you a sense of what is the process that a supermarket has to go through to upload a product on the platform. So imagine you're the manager or typically the staff in a supermarket store, and what you would do is you would scan the product using a mobile application that you can download. Then you would get an overview of the scanned product. Then you have to click on the product, and then you have to add the product. So if you do that for every product, and typically you may have quite a large number of products in a day. So it's a question of finding the product which are about to expire, and secondly, having them also on the platform. And since this is quite a time-consuming process, and there are quite a large range of categories where last-minute discounts are offered. So you've got meats, vegetables, which are more like the usual suspects, fruits, of course, but you also have ready-to-eat products, cheese, bread, and so on. And the question we thought is that are all these product categories equally important for the supermarket to generate views on the digital platform? And that was how the idea started. And so that's basically the objective of our study, is to quantify the effects of product uploads on product views and how this varies across different categories. And this could help supermarkets understand which category provides a bigger bang for the buck to the supermarket. And it could help the supermarket focus on fewer categories, thereby rationing its staff time. Okay. Right, so quick look at the contributions to the literature. There has, of course, food waste literature is quite evolving and in general, but this, if you look at focus on the literature on food waste and last-minute discounts, we find that the current papers, they tend to look at, what is the kind of brand image, or, that having a product on last minute discount, how does that impact the brand image of the product? Or what are the risk perceptions and trust involved in someone buying the product? And they typically answer these questions using surveys. There's also some other literature which looks at, they indeed look at the last minute discounts using kind of archival data or big data, but they don't focus on the category level impact of it. And that is where our current study sits. We extend prior work by empirically assessing which categories are more effective for dissemination on these digital platforms. Okay, a bit more on the empirical setting. Right, so what you see of the picture on the left is what a sticker typically looks like. So this is, you can look at meat and it's about to expire, and the supermarket will put an additional sticker on it. The process is, after you put the additional sticker on the product, you still have to scan the UPC code, the code, the barcode, so to speak, of the product, and go through the entire process to upload the product on the digital platform. So I've talked about this already, but again, a brief synopsis. Typically, supermarkets offer these discounts a day or two before they expire. The products expire. To participate on the platforms, grocery stores would pay a fixed annual fee. So essentially, they subscribe for a whole year, and then they choose to they look at to see if it's worth it or not. What the store personnel need to do is they use a mobile scanner to upload the discounted perishables on the platform. As consumers, we can, of course, we can join the platform for free. And based on our geolocation, GPS, the app automatically identifies what partner supermarkets are there near us and suggests, okay, can you perhaps look at this and this? And then we can pick on them and select and choose the supermarket we want to receive offers from. Okay, so quick, maybe look at the data description of what data we have. So we have kind of panel data from 10 retailers for about a year, which gives about 150,000 products from different categories, which were occupied by supermarkets, and about 10,000 consumers who viewed these products. So what is the actual activity we observe? So the activity we observe is measured at the supermarket store week level. And so we find, we see what products are offered on last minute discounts. We also see what information on what category they belong to. We also know how many hours are there for the product to remain on this discount before it expires. So this means that you could probably, let's say, put one product on the discount, which has 24 hours before it expires. Or it could be that you can, let's say, put an avocado, which has, like, say, 36 hours before it expires. So we also see the number of hours remaining for the product to still be bought, basically. And in terms of consumer activity, we see basically the consumer views of these discounted products. So how do we kind of model this data? So we essentially model these category level views using sort of a mixed effect model. So again, views is essentially the aggregate views of a particular category for a particular supermarket in a particular week. And we regress this against the uploads that have been there by the particular supermarket for the category in that week. And also we do also see the number of hours of discount that is there for that particular category and the supermarket. And then, of course, since the whole idea is to focus on the category level effects, we have random effects on all these parameters. And again, what the idea of the random effects is that it allows us to, as you see in the kind of equation below, basically you can pick out what are the categories. Basically, we get estimates of different categories. So here BC1 would be like a broad category 1, BC2 broad category 3, and so on. Okay. Right. So the current kind of preliminary results we have, and we are going to focus on the, so if you look at the effectiveness of uploads, well, so again, we see it varies by category type. Now, then of course, first, of course, look at what are the broad categories and how do we decide them? So we kind of decided to aggregate some of the categories, let's say fruits and vegetables together, based on the fact that, they are physically close in the supermarket store. And also when you go online, you typically see them as, offered together. So they're basically categories which are sort of in the same aisle or very close to each other. So that gives us roughly the categories you see out here, with bread, toppings, and pastry, cake and candy, dairy, cheese, eggs, fruits, vegetables, meat and fish. Ready to consume would be ready to eat product, as well as ready to consume juices. There are fresh juices made by the supermarket. And you also have rice and pasta clubbed together. So, of course, the uploads of the different categories have different levels of effectiveness. And we find that the ready-to-consume category is typically the most effective in generating views on the platform, whereas the bread or the pastry category is the least effective. Now, then the question is, okay, how about the hours on discount per category? How does that vary in terms of how that leads to what is the impact of the hours on discount on the views? So obviously, so here the idea is a higher estimate would imply that a higher number of hours on discount would lead to a higher number of views on the platform. And the idea is to also help supermarkets decide how long before expiry should they put a product on discount. And so what we find, for example, is that, of course, there's a heterogeneity in terms of the effectiveness, but the ready-to-consume category has the lowest estimate, which means that increasing the hours on discount for this category is not that effective, in that it does not lead to a strong increase in views. And if I'm thinking more about it, I think it makes sense because in some sense, these people probably want to buy this particular kind of category a bit closer to the expiry date, because they are probably a bit more, well, for the supermarket especially, I think they would probably want to wait a little bit closer to the expiry before trying to sell them off. And I think for the consumers, I think they are more, how shall I say, they're more okay with picking something up from these categories which are a bit closer to the expiry date. Okay, so what are the main takeaways that we have? So supermarkets can focus their efforts to upload last-minute discounts on certain categories which are more effective in garnering views on the platform, and increasing the hours available on these last-minute discounts can have a strong impact on views for some categories, but not all. That's about it from me, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we'll just have time for one question, just to make sure we fit in the final presentation before we go to the next part of the event. But that's really interesting. I mean, it's another case where you've got a huge amount of data there, and the insights around how retailers are using these food sharing platforms are really interesting because they've kind of been taken up. And one of the things I always wonder is, what would it take for their systems to be kind of jointly connected to the food sharing app themselves, because they seem to, employees have to go on there and put stuff on there, don't they? But it could be a bit more automated than that, if that makes sense.
Could you come again? I missed that.
I suppose the question is almost like, what could retailers do to make the most of these food sharing apps at the moment? They've got kind of two separate systems going on, and is there integration there, or is it more that the staff can do more? And you had lots of interesting insights around how long these products are on there. So what could they do to facilitate them?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I'm thinking aloud, what more can they do? Well, I mean, so for the retailer, their incentive is to get people to come to the store, and I'm guessing if they can have some kind of a system which keeps on updating automatically. For example, what you see is that, let's say an avocado is on a discount, and you also see what quantities are there, there are 5 or 10 or 1, right? And currently you just get to see the number on discount, and then as a consumer, you decide to go or not. But if there's a way in which this can be updated automatically, like if someone goes and buys one of them, then from 5 you get 4 or 3, so then that might be a good indicator to the consumer whether or not this product is available, and whether he or she should step out and try and go and get it. I think that could be perhaps something that could be done, but it has challenges because we have supermarket systems which are typically very they're not very keen on sharing or interacting with other companies or third-party platforms. But I suspect this could be one way to kind of make consumers more increase take-up among consumers.
Yeah, great. Did you have any comments, John, or should we move on?
I think that my first thought was very similar to you, John. I think, yeah, thanks for that, Chantal. It was really, really, really interesting. I think one of the things that occurred to me when you were speaking was retail store design. So in the consumer behavior courses, often when you talk about retail, you talk about, I don't know, putting bread in the corner. So somebody navigates the whole supermarket. Everybody comes in for bread, make it smell nice, put it in the corner. Yeah. You'll see a lot of products. And I thought there was a really interesting parallel in what you're talking about by ranking these items digitally. Is there like a parallel in the way that we design interfaces? Like I don't know whether I understood you rightly, but if bread is not important, then these people that come into the supermarket aren't going to navigate across the whole store. They're going to mainly go to part of it. And there seems to be a really interesting trade-off between what would happen to a supermarket that privileges the digital over the physical design. Not sure that's a question, but yeah, I was just interested to hear whether that trade-off is something that they would consider.
Yeah, I mean that could also be something to think about. I think one thing I should just clarify that this is if we have data essentially on the views of the products on these platforms, right? So bread could still be important for the supermarket per se, but we only are focusing on what we see that is there on the platforms, right? So the results basically mean that from the perspective of uploading bread on the platform, it is not as important as, let's say, a ready-to-eat, right? In getting views, and therefore that would translate into people coming. But in terms of actually pulling in consumers, in terms of people coming in, that could still be important. So that's something we can't really find out from the data we have. But it's true that it could have other implications, of course, about store design, in terms of, do you want to put everything together in one place, right? Or put them side by side, right? So do you have an avocado which is full price and one which is 30% off side by side? That is also something which is there in some supermarkets, and some others actually put them all together. All the ones which are on discount, so you have an avocado and bread in very close to each other. So that could be something interesting that I could think about. But, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we need to move on to make sure that. The last speaker has their time. There's an interesting comment by Hannah, who says speaking as a medium-sized retailer more normally comes at the expense of compliance and therefore quality. I would say pick a single process and do it really well. So that's interesting. So the last presentation, invite the speaker to share their presentation. So the role of digital platform in waste recovery in the food supply chain. I'll just check if they're in the call actually. And this is one of the PhD students at the University of Nottingham, John, I think you said.
Yeah, we've not actually spoken. We've not actually.
Okay, yeah, you said. Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, well, they might not be here. Okay. Oh, there we go. I was trying to hurry us up, and then they're not here anyway. Okay. But yeah, but it's interesting
like it, does it?
That comment by Hannah, because Hannah that's from Co-op, and it's that process of you can be part of these food sharing apps, etc. But if the procedure doesn't work with your own procedures, etc., then it's not going to be successful. If that makes sense. And I've spoken to Jamie about this before about how do you get on board these larger brands and businesses, given that their employees have their own procedures to do. You don't want to give them something else to do, to put stuff on an app and share food, etc. It's got to be done in such a way that it's easy to do, it's understandable, it only takes a few minutes to do. If you're having a busy day, you don't want to have to kind of come out in the store and have to kind of give people some food or whatever. So that's quite interesting. So okay, so the next event starts at 4, sorry, which is the fair share event, all around kind of frontline of community food provisioning. But yeah, if any of the speakers or the two track chairs have any kind of final comments to close, open the floor.
I would just say thank you for everybody coming. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for the talk. It was very enlightening. Yeah,
it's been really good. I don't know of many kind of symposiums or conferences that have tracks dedicated to this kind of food sharing and the digital side of it. You mentioned, John, that it's a new practice and it's changing all the time. We've had a real nice mix of how food sharing, like in Alwyn's presentation, that it's linked to community gardening, etc., and things like that. And then there's a more kind of digital side of it where it's linked to supermarkets and etc. So it's an expanding field, and perhaps there's like a kind of there's a special issue somewhere to say this is the expanse of what this field looks like at the moment, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And just to pick up on that last point that you mentioned, Suzanne, who I think is a keynote tomorrow, is the editor of Appetite. I don't think she's in the room at the moment, but she did mention that there is a special issue, forgotten the journal now, so yeah, please forgive me, but it's on computational commensality, and it seems to overlap with what you're saying. So I'll try and dig out the reference for that and share it. But I would totally agree. I think certainly when I started working with Olio probably 4 years ago, I think the data set that we got was something like 10,000 food sharing interactions. And you can see just it's exploded in that time. And listening to Jamie today suggests that 40 million users are on board. I don't think it can be trivialized anymore. It is genuinely getting traction in a way that it wasn't just a few years ago. So yeah, I think we'll probably see more research in this area inevitably. And I mean, the Sharer project is great, isn't it? How many amazing projects are they documenting worldwide? It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it kind of gives an idea that there's almost like kind of like an economic and a social value. When you kind of put an amount to this kind of contributes towards the economy or whatever it might be. So when Jamie said that some of the stalls are interested in this because it drives more footfall, people come in to collect their Maggi bag, but also they come and find a new shop they might not have been to before, or they come and buy a fancy pastry that normally they wouldn't afford. It's quite important to the I suppose it's sort of part of the economy, it's part of what's going to drive in sales in shops, etc., and what's driving progress towards meeting the sustainability goals as well. About this activity, some of it might not happen, and maybe in the future we'll see more kind of formal recognition of that, perhaps in one of the UN reports or something like that. I don't know, that it's an important activity that needs to be engaged with. So great. Okay, yeah, so we can have a short break now of 10-20 minutes.
I think I found the link for that call for papers. I think this is. I'll share it in the chat now.
Perfect.
And thank you for sharing as well.
Okay, great.
Great.
Yeah, thanks everyone.